smart writers.
Hey, San Francisco, I'm Ben Kaplan, and this is the podcast where we define who we are and who we want to be.
We are diverse.
We are innovative.
We are inclusive.
We are change makers.
Problem solvers.
Activists.
Leaders.
Citizens.
We are open-minded.
Optimistic.
There's hope for a better tomorrow. And you gotta give them hope.
This is the podcast that's more than a podcast.
San Francisco, they are the world champions.
We are San Francisco. Hey, San Francisco. Today is another installment of our Meet the 2024 Candidates series. And we're chatting today with Catherine Stefani, who is a candidate for California State Assembly in District 19. That's the western half of San Francisco and the northwestern part of San Mateo County. And also, Catherine is a current member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Catherine, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you had a big day on March 5. I think from a personal perspective, it was like, I guess, a resounding success, meaning you were up for two different positions. Of course, trying to qualify for the general election, which you did. You had the most votes, about 60% of the vote for California State Assembly, but also you were the top vote getter in your district for the Democratic County Central Committee, the DCCC. So how does it feel? Was that a relief? Were you surprised at all the support? What is the aftermath of the March elections for you like?
Yeah, no, it was a very good night. And I felt, very pleased to see the vote count for the DCCC in terms of the highest percentage with both 80-19 and 80-17. So we felt really good about it and really confirmed for us that our message is resonating with San Francisco voters and San Mateo as well.
Well, and what do you think about, a lot of people are trying to think about what does this all mean for November in San Francisco? Mm-hmm. And a couple of the narratives are, one, there's these sort of like winds of reform coming, sort of the moderate side would say that. Also, though, there was a little bit of, hey, this is really low voter turnout. What does that mean? Particularly, we have a presidential election year, but is there enough enthusiasm about this Biden-Trump matchup?
Well, I think the trends are continuing along the lines of people wanting their city to be safe. They want more housing created in their city. They want their public schools to teach all sorts of subjects, including algebra. I think what you've seen in 2022 with the recalls and an incumbent supervisor losing his seat in District 4, and then what you saw in this primary is a consistent voter turnout that, wants, I think, the basics that they deserve from their government.
I'm interested in your perspective on, new people entering politics in San Francisco. You had a long career. You were a deputy district attorney in Costa County. You were a legislative aide, both here in the city to different members of the boards of supervisors, but also the mayor of San Jose, other places you work. So what is it like for you being an elected official now? Did you always think you would be? Did you think you would be more of the behind the scenes person? What has been that transition been like?
Well, I've always wanted to be in office. When I was 16, I entered for my congressman back in Washington, D.C., Congressman Tony Coelho, and I always had visions of being in office, and especially as a woman wanting to represent, women and children and wanting to be that voice and having a seat at the table. So I've always seen myself as wanting to do this and not just be behind the scenes, but for me, being a staffer was such a great education on how to do this job well. But in terms of lifting up others, one of the things, I ran for the Democratic County Central Committee back in 2010, and I did not make it. And I had no name ID and was just an activist, a lifelong Democrat that really wanted a chance. And so when I look at the DCCC results, I'm really excited that we have been able to lift up a lot of, activists that really, want to represent their city and want to represent the Democratic Party. And one of the reasons why I had kind of resisted doing that as an elected official was because I think that when elected officials get in there, they have the name ID, and it makes it harder for people that are just getting into politics to get a place.
Meaning this party central committee is sort of like a great way for sort of an entry into politics. It's kind of like the farm baseball team before you get to the major leagues to start. But yet at the same time, there's been this battle for control of the Democratic Party in San Francisco. And strategists know that high name ID, which means probably you've ran for something else, you're elected works in winning. So there's this kind of conflict or tension between the two. Let's bring up the farm team, but let's also like make sure we win and get control.
Right. And when they approached me about it, that was pretty much the argument they laid out. Like, we would love you to, lead the slate, and they were right. When you look at how many votes I got and you look at the slate and how well everyone did, I think that I'm really glad I participated in that way. And I think the DCCC definitely needed a makeover. So I'm really happy about the results.
And what about this? I know there's kind of this sort of stepping stone from, you work in San Francisco, maybe you get the promotion to Sacramento. You mentioned Jackie Spear, which is an interesting case of someone who, of course, like in the, U.S. House of Representatives, who actually made the decision that she felt she could have more impact going back to local on essentially what is like the equivalent in her area of like the Board of Supervisors. What do you think about that notion of like, there's a lot of room to make an impact on local now more than ever before? Do we have to just be kind of like stepping up to like the next level?
I think people who really have public service in their hearts and who are really led by wanting to do the most good for the most people find where that place is. And like in the case of Jackie Spear, she's come home from retiring from Congress and realized there are still things that need to get fixed in San Mateo County. And she still wants to make that happen. She knows that she's, able to do that based on all her experience. So, and that's how I am. I mean, I've never been the type of politician that has to have a certain title after my name. I don't have to be this or be that. My heart has always been, where can I serve where I think I can do the most good. And I think I've done a lot here on the Board of Supervisors. This opportunity to run for assembly has come up, and I've learned so much in my nearly 30-year career of being a lawyer and a staffer and a department head and a supervisor that I really think that I could take all of this experience and work at the state level and deliver results in terms of public safety, housing, healthcare. There's so much I've learned and so much I want to do. So I think like if you have public service in your heart and that's really what you want to do and your why, you just find where you're meant to be and make it happen.
You, of course, now represent District 2, which is, key neighborhood is the Marina. You live in Cow Hollow now. What is it like? Because I think how you became an elected official on the Board of Supervisors actually relates even to the mayor's race right now, because you were a legislative aide in District 2 for multiple boards of supervisor, multiple members of the boards of supervisors. But the most recent person before you took office was Mark Farrell. Mm-hmm. You were appointed when he became interim mayor for that 6-month period. And now, of course, he's challenging Mayor Breed. So what is your perspective on all of this? You've known these players. Are you a Mark Farrell for mayor supporter?
Well, that, we'll definitely get to that. I have endorsed Mayor Breed, and, I have a lot of respect for Mark, and he's, I wouldn't be in this position had it not been for Mark believing in me. And I worked for him for 5 years, and I have a lot of faith in him. So we are set to have a discussion about all of that. So I'll have that discussion with him first. But yeah, I believe in Mark. I believe like I said, he's done a lot for me, and he would make a good mayor.
I see. Well, and when will you do it? So you're considering changing your endorsement?
No, I've endorsed Mayor Breed, and I'm not going to withdraw my endorsement for her. But, this is ranked choice voting, and there's different ways to handle that when you believe in more than possibly one person in a race. One
of the things that from the March election that was notable, I thought, was the resounding defeat of Proposition B, which was essentially and it was like, I think it's, votes are still being tallied, but it's like, I think it's like 72.5% against. That was the proposition that would say police full staffing was contingent on a kind of future tax, what opponents of it called it was a cop tax. Right. And you were kind of, I think some of the moderates were surprised by your vote because you voted in support of Proposition B. It went to the ballot on a 6-5 split, in part because of your vote. So what was your feeling? What was your thinking on that? And did it surprise you that voters were so overwhelmingly opposed? No, it was very messy. And it was, not a good piece of policy, really, that went to the ballot. What was problematic about it, because obviously I've been on this board for 6 years and no one has supported law enforcement more than I have. I mean, I started my career in law enforcement as a prosecutor.
The problem with the way Prop B was rolled out and how was it rolled out at the Board of Supervisors was that there wasn't a lot of input from many stakeholders, including 911 operators and nurses and those that, that could be affected by a large set aside without a real vision of how you get people in those positions. So my feeling was, and back in, I think 2008, was it, or around the late 2000s, we put something, the voters voted for Proposition S, which basically said that if you're going to do a huge set aside, there has to be a funding source.
And just for people watching, a set aside is essentially you've like set money aside that can't be used elsewhere. So it's earmarked there. And the problem is when you have set asides, just generally speaking, it becomes harder to make budgetary decisions, choices, because like this money is off limits.
Exactly. And it's a very moderate position to be opposed to set asides. And if you look back at San Francisco's history, you'll see that moderates fought the continued set asides in San Francisco because it does restrict how you can budget. And in San Francisco, we have 22 set asides. That's more than every single county combined. There's 58 counties in California. I think LA has one, maybe San Diego has one. Set asides are not a good way to manage the general fund dollars. It's just not. And that was my problem with it. I did not believe in taxing people at all for law enforcement.
Essentially, like police services, people think I'm already paying taxes for this. Why should I be taxed again to get this?
And it wasn't a cop tax. I mean, that was good messaging for the people who were opposed to it. Definitely they landed well on that messaging, but I was never for a cop tax and never for charging more for the services that I think that we are obligated to provide. And that is something that I have said. But when you look at what's happening, and if you're really trying to solve our police staffing crisis, you have to figure out why people don't want to be police officers. And you have to have a conversation with the POA, which I have done. And you have to understand that over a 10-year period, well, since 2006, the police department was supposed to be investing in a recruitment fund, according to their MOU, to the tune of $250,000 every budget year. And they weren't doing that. They weren't spending enough money on how do you actually recruit members into the San Francisco Police Department. And there's a shortage of police officers that we weren't working to fill. In our current budget right now, we have 300 funded positions for police officers. That money is there in the police department's budget. There's not a lack of funding there for the officers. What there is a lack of ideas on how to get people into those positions.
Well, and do you think we kind of sat on our hands because, police wasn't really defunded, even though that was the slogan of the time, defund the police? It was just like basically recruitment stopped. And that was a way of sort of strapping police services that is hitting us now.
Yeah, well, I think the San Francisco Police Department has not gotten the credit it deserves for all the reforms it has put into place. And I think the way that we talk about policing, we have to be very careful because, what happened to George Floyd was absolutely horrific. And anyone with a pulse and a soul would be opposed to what happened and would want reforms in a police department or would want someone like that punished and never be allowed to be a police officer anywhere again or spend the rest of his life in prison after what happened. I mean, that was just horrific. What we need to do is be in conversation with law enforcement about how do we do better? How do we change the face of policing where we're interacting with the community more and keeping people safe? I mean, that is still something that is necessary in our society. We still need police officers to keep us safe. And our shortage, I think, is really causing a lot of problems in San Francisco. And I think, too, it wasn't just after George Floyd. I think in 2020, they did defund the police by $120 million.
Well,
and I was the only no vote on that.
Well, and of course, Police Chief Scott was hired in part to clean up really the prior kind of police chief that had a lot of issues of excessive force and other kinds of issues. He was brought in for that purpose. Last question I just want to ask you on Proposition B, and then I want to talk about kind of a recent bill you've done now, is just some of the talking points I saw, of course, a lot of unions that were non-police unions were opposed to the original conception of Proposition V. They ended up supporting the version that was amended because they felt like, hey, this is going to take funding away from us potentially if all this money is set aside for police. And I heard some people say, well, Supervisor Stefani, she's running for office. She needs all of those other union support. That's why she's kind of like acquiescing to those unions because she needs their support right now. How do you respond to that? I saw that talking point circulated.
Yeah, I mean, I could see why people would conclude that is very, I think it's, I don't think it's really a fair assessment, but, I am a supporter of unions. I am a supporter of not just our police department, but other city workers that are very necessary to deliver on public safety issues, like our 911 operators, like our nurses, like other public sector workers. And like I said, the fiscal irresponsibility of a huge set aside when you're setting aside money and you don't even know how to really fill the positions, as you just, very well laid out why it's so hard to even get police officers into these positions. If you're setting all this money aside, that's going to require all these layoffs here because we're entering into a very dismal financial situation, as you know, with the deficits we're facing. You're creating problems where we might have to lay off workers that we actually need. It doesn't mean I don't think that we need police officers. So it was...
And maybe it was a little bit too narrowly prescribed because we have a lot of, I know you've been involved in creating like Office of Victim Services in the past. There's other emergency services that we need for public safety. Maybe what your point is that it was a little bit too narrowly prescribed on just police when actually it should be public safety in a broader sense.
Let's just say the set aside wasn't the fiscal way to go about it, nor is a tax the fiscal way to go about it for cops. Nobody landed on the right solution here, but my point was, I saw an opportunity for people to finally admit, people that had not admitted before, that we do need minimum numbers of staffing when it comes to our police department. So that for me was a win. And you'll see if you go back and you listen to why Dean Preston and Hillary Ronan did not vote for Prop B and did not want it on the ballot, because they didn't believe in a minimum staffing of police officers. I actually do. So for me, it was a very confusing, very nuanced, hard to explain. People that don't want to really get into the weeds on why someone might make a decision one way probably won't, give me the benefit of the doubt. And that's fine. I mean, I still did okay, on March 5th. I feel very okay about where I have been on all the public safety issues and all the incredible public safety votes I've taken in the 6 years I've been on this board, and that I will continue to take support on our law enforcement agencies. So, it's in a way, I think it was too confusing it was so muddied by the time it got to the voters that the fact it didn't pass was probably a good thing, so that we can start all over and really figure out how do we actually work together to make sure that we are providing enough police officers and we're taking the right steps to get them into those roles, while at the same time protecting our other workers that are essential as well.
Well, and what do you think about, when I talk to up and coming elected officials, particularly actually those who serve in, the state assembly of California, they will say, they're a legislator, so they're proud of the number of laws they've created. They're like, I've created, 22 laws, or I start this session and it's like, I've got my list of 30 things I want to get through, and we're all battling with everyone else. And so because you're an elected official, you take pride in the laws you create. Makes sense. But I wonder, there used to be this movement about sunset provisions in laws. And what that movement said, and it was more popular in kind of like the 1980s, was laws should expire over time, meaning we might just not see something around the corner. This law may become obsolete. I've talked to members of the state assembly who said, what? About half my bills are obsolete now. They're not even needed. What do you think about this idea with all these ballot measures that we should have something that says, hey, after maybe 8 years, 2 supervisor terms, or if it's experimental, 4 years, we should just have it sunset. It goes away because if it's great, we'll renew it. If it's not, we wouldn't have so much clutter in the regulations and rules of San Francisco.
I think it really depends on the topic and the subject and what you're talking about. If you look at 1994, Senator Feinstein passed an assault weapons ban in Congress.
And you've been very passionate about sort of gun violence. It's been one of your key topics.
Definitely. Yeah. And that had a sunset in 2004. Well, by the time 2004 rolled around, we had a Republican president, a Republican Congress, and they let that lapse.
Well, in the context of San Francisco, I mean, you mentioned national issues, but to me, it's like, I don't know, you can agree or disagree, but there's so many rules and regulations. I want to talk about corruption because you've just had a bill about that. But to me, there's so many rules and regulations that give corruption a place to hide. Like, basically, if we have slow processes anywhere in the government, there's always someone who can be hired to expedite that process. And that could be a senior level official. That could be a low level official who just happens to, have the stamp that approves something. And so the issue I have, and the reason I wonder about sunset provisions in general, is that if we had more of those, like, maybe like housing regulations we have now that prevent housing, that were in there for a different time. And we just need, we have people on the streets who are unhoused that we just need to do everything we can to get them housing fast. But we have all these rules and regulations. If those would have sunsetted and we could have kept the good ones, got rid of the bad, we might not be in this predicament now.
I think we should just pass good laws, and you should just have good legislators who know how to do that. I think the corruption laws that I've passed have been incredible, and we have really done a lot. I can think of 4 huge things that I've done at the board that certainly don't need a sunset date. And those deal with a lot of what happened with Mohammed Nurul. We did a law around pre-qualified contract pools where he would reach into them and be able to pick out his friends.
He put his friends, you're saying he put his friends in a pool and then say, oh, this is our pool. And then I grab a friend, and those friends were often paying him thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right. And I put a stop to that through legislation that we passed, that passed unanimously at the board. And that was after reading about what went wrong there. It was set up so that it was too easy to manipulate. Do I think like something like that needs to sunset? No, that needs to stay on the books forever. That was the No Graft Act. And then also my Good Grant organization, after reading an audit, we found out that over a 3-year period, departments gave away $5.4 billion to various nonprofits or grantees, almost 6,000 grants with no oversight, no open solicitation, nothing, no transparency, no paperwork. This money was given away. And, when you look back, again, that law passed unanimously. I created a new admin code, 21G. Aaron Peskin said this should have been 25 years ago. It was a huge piece of legislation. And do I think something like that should sunset and go away? No, it's a good law that should stay on the books forever.
Well, let's talk about budget, and we can agree to disagree on sunsetting. My opinion is, hey, if it's as good as you say it is, we'll renew it. But let's talk about your recent bill, which recently passed, which is about having performance metrics for nonprofits, having it standardized across the city. You also have, more of like requirements of supplying data. It's empowering the city comptroller to do more than just sort of like check basic finances of these organizations, but to actually look at their performance. So that's a bill that was just passed. You proposed it. Do you think this will make a difference in terms of how we spend money? I know we want more accountability, but to me, it's shocking. I feel like people don't know this. Like, okay, we have a $14.6 billion budget. We're talking about $1.7 billion that's going to nonprofits. That sounds like 12% of the budget, which is still quite a bit. People are like, oh, still 12%. But then when you look at the amount that's actually discretionary in aggregate, that's about $4.5 billion that we really have control over. So right. $1.7 billion out of $4.5 billion. This is like close. This is over 1/3 of the budget. We're essentially outsourcing to these groups, to your point, with very little accountability. So do you think this kind of accountability legislation will have an impact on the budget itself? Because maybe some people are accountable, but maybe we shouldn't be outsourcing so much of core city services and our social safety net and just hoping someone else delivers.
Yeah, we do rely on nonprofits to deliver a lot of city services. It's more expensive for the city to deliver them than it is to contract out sometimes with nonprofits to deliver on housing and healthcare and recovery services, things like that. So we need those nonprofits. And there are a lot of good nonprofits doing very good work. I happen to be on the board of directors of one for a while back for the homeless prenatal program. They did incredible work. So I don't want people to get the impression that there's nonprofits out there not doing good work, because there are many of them. What we've seen in the press,
every few weeks, right? There's like a scandal of someone using a nonprofit, like their $100,000 expense account for trips to Tahoe, and they're billing it to the city.
Right. And what even people say, well, that's not happening everywhere. Well, the problem with that is that people lose faith in their government. And that's a big thing. That is a huge thing. You don't want people losing faith in their government. Then they don't vote. Then, they're angry that, they don't believe that their government is working for them. And this is not good for democracy. So you need to get a handle on where your taxpayer dollars are going and are they being spent wisely. And I think my legislation, actually, I know my legislation is going to make sure that that is happening. I am so excited about this legislation. Again, it's passed unanimously. Supervisor Ronan said, positive things about it. It was a good piece of legislation that we took a long time to work on, because we had the nonprofits involved, we had the departments involved, the controller's office, and we came up and landed on something that we're going to have a centralized place where we are going to create performance standards and, ways to basically review whether or not the nonprofit is, meeting the mark.
I have a couple questions for you about that, because everything you've said makes sense. And I think, to me, tackling corruption or the perception of corruption is like to get confidence back in our city, to kind of get our mojo back.
Right.
We've got to accomplish this.
Definitely.
Here's what I worry about, and tell me if you think the legislation goes far enough, or if you have a phase 2 in mind. One of them is that I see now lots of city performance scorecards. Like I could go on the city government site and I can see those. And you click around, you can see the scores. I went and looked on homelessness earlier today, and it shows, our scorecard on homelessness shows green. We are meeting all standards. And it's like, we sort of gave ourselves an A on the scorecard. And I think I don't know a single person that says we deserve an A on homelessness in San Francisco, right? Probably the other end of the spectrum. So let's say we make all these scorecards. San Francisco is prolific in providing data, but what do we do with it? How do we have some teeth in this so it's not just a scorecard that gets never used and doesn't mean anything?
Well, I think the evaluations on a nonprofit's performance will be public and it will be transparent. And so the public will know whether or not the nonprofit we are contracting with is delivering on the services it is promised to provide pursuant to the contract. So with that information, if the Board of Supervisors continues to invest in a nonprofit that's not delivering, that is bad. That will look bad for them, and they have to get reelected by the voters. So I think this transparency is actually going to be able, to hold a lot of people accountable, not just the nonprofits, not just the departments, but also the supervisors who continue to approve contracts when sometimes that they shouldn't. Like my pretrial diversion contract vote a while back, I was the only one who voted no when they were extending it for 3 years for another $18 million, when we had proof right before us that the information they were giving to us on how they were doing was not true. They were telling us a certain percentage of people were making all their court dates, a certain percentage of people weren't reoffending.
It was just made up. There was like someone just wrote a number, like were they like flat out blatantly lying, or were they just like, shading the numbers a certain way? We're not going to count this to make our numbers better. They
were looking at data in a 3-month time period instead of looking at it from when the person went on, was on OR, on their own recognizance, to their trial date. So they weren't aggregating the information in a way that made any sense. And they certainly weren't doing it according to standards. And so we pointed that out. The California Policy Lab actually looked at their data and came up with data that did not match what they were saying. And so it was reviewed. And if you Google it, you'll see the article on it and why I voted no. And so things like that. I mean, when you have information in front of the Board of Supervisors that really makes you want to question the nonprofit and how they're doing, and you have, 10 supervisors still voting yes on that contract, my intention.
You want something to point to that says we have something objective to look at.
Exactly.
And if you're going to vote to support this, and they're getting a D in our scorecard, you better have a pretty good reason, or people have a right to be mad at you.
Right. And now that the controller's office, this, evaluation of their performance will be centralized, I think it will be easier to hold everyone accountable.
One of the things with like, there was recently, kind of a Proposition D, which dealt with ethics that passed overwhelmingly. One of the things I worry about, because I'm like as big a anti-corruption person as there is, but I wonder about when we add more rules and more regulations that slow down processes, that does that hard, like how can we be like firmly against corruption, but also not slow down process? I'll give you an example. We want to be fair in hiring and how we hire. We don't want favoritism. We don't want like someone's best friend hired, which there's been instances of corruption of that. So we do all of these rules to say we've got to hire people in a fair way. But then lo and behold, we're incredibly slow in hiring people because we have so much to do. Another one would be housing, where we have so many things. Okay, make sure this is, we want good environmental sound policy. We want to make sure this doesn't have a negative effect on the community. But we put all of these things in place and oh my gosh, no one can get any housing built. So how do we add more oversight, more rules, but without slowing down the process and just making things, we've tried to be so fair that now we just can't get anything done.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to give me a specific example, but more process always, could be an impediment. Again, it just depends on what the subject matter is. With housing, we've really tried to streamline a lot of that. And even with business, the permitting process, we've tried to streamline that as well.
It is, but then you see things like, I think there was a case the Chronicle wrote about it, of like someone who's trying to open, a restaurant in a vacant space, or I think it was a bakery. They're going through all these hoops and they said, oh, I thought there was a law that's passed that says we have to do this in 30 days. Our permit is expedited in 30 days. And then they find out, it turns out, no, that's 30 days when it's on San Francisco's desk. We start the clock. If it's stuff you have to do, it doesn't count. And now this lasts years. So it's like, I don't know. It's like, we just need speed because I feel like we don't have a sense of the state of emergency we have on so many crises. What can we do? And it's like, I'm for oversight, but not if it slows it down.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I definitely agree. That's why I've voted for every streamlining piece of legislation that's been put in front of me. So I do think we need to find a quicker way to get things done.
Another, I think, interesting topic is you've been a champion of sort of victims' rights. Mm-hmm. People, and I know, I mean, it was a big battle in the kind of, especially the DA recall of like, are we prioritizing the rights of, criminals over the rights of victims? It's a big discussion. One of the things I wonder is, how do we do that more effectively? I feel like, for instance, things that sound good, like we want police officers having, less admin time, do more policing. But some of that admin time could be taking a police report, making sure that gets registered so we can pursue it. And there's so many people in San Francisco who've been victims of property crime who feel like they've been told, I shouldn't even file a report. Nothing's going to happen. So what should we do more for victims, whether it's something small or something big, to like feel like we have faster responses? Because 911 is slower than ever. 311 response is spotty. Some places it's good, some places it's not. What about just like getting faster response to instill more confidence in San Francisco?
That's exactly why I put Prop D on the ballot in 2022 and why it passed with about 60% of the vote, is because there are victims of crime that aren't really offered anything from the city, and victims of crime that might not ever see a police officer, never see a case, that never goes to trial, and yet they still need help. They're still victims. And so that's why I created the Office of Victim and Witness Rights, which is going to consolidate. We have so many different services for victims in so many different departments.
It's all spread out all over the place.
So
right?
what's happening right now is that they are going through the process and they are interviewing the departments, and they are going to consolidate the victim services that we do have under this one department. It's only 4 positions. It's actually going to save money. And we're going to make sure that, if there is a victim of crime or someone, and it's out of the realm of law enforcement, because a lot of victims of crime, don't really want to get involved with law enforcement, or especially in the domestic violence sphere. There's a lot of reasons why people might not want to go to law enforcement, but they're still victims of crime, and they need help from the city. And so even like you're a storefront owner, your window has been smashed for the 5th time. We have a program at OEWD that can help you pay for that window. Again, it shouldn't happen in the first place, but the reality is it does. There's all these little programs that we want to consolidate to a place where if you're a victim of crime, you can go to the city and you can get help. It also creates a right to counsel for domestic violence victims, which is definitely necessary. That again, it's something separate from the court case that might be going on, that gets the victim help that they need to get out of that abusive relationship. So, I've always been victim focused since I was a prosecutor right out of law school, and through all my time working in government, I definitely believe that we owe more to the victims that we give them.
And I feel like right now, if I was going to identify like what would give people confidence in their city again, not even just city government, but just confidence in the city, what could we do? It's like, one, making sure that like there is no corruption, that people who are in positions of power have the best interests of city at heart. Two, be responsive. So if something happens to me, if I'm a victim of something, we're gonna track down every lead. We are gonna do everything we can to do that. And three, I don't know if you agree with this, but reset the budget. I think I think you've even made the point that like, what are we getting for the money we spend? And it feels like the budget, like the budget debates every year are so incremental. It's like, we're going to, this little program, we want to get this pet program in. Do we just need to like hit the reset button just to feel like, hey, if you're getting $100 million from the city of San Francisco, you've got to requalify. We're starting over. We're justifying everything. Should we just hit reset on the entire budget?
Well, I mean, we have contractual obligations. I'm a lawyer. You can't just get out of the contract that you've signed up with someone. But yeah, I mean, I think that we need to look at things differently. We need to look at people and look at those that we're contracting with and ask, are you really delivering on the services that you said you could provide? And a lot of times, and I mentioned this yesterday in an article that came out about my nonprofit legislation, a lot of times people answer an RFP, a request for proposals, and they get into a contract with the city and they say they're going to do this. But then all of a sudden they're involved in that contract and they say, well, we can't do this because we're understaffed. There's a staffing crisis. And my whole point is, don't then say you can do something that you cannot do. Do not overpromise and underdeliver. And again, it's going back to my nonprofit legislation, as you mentioned so well, in terms of as putting $1.7 billion into these contracts and who are delivering vital services. We need to make sure that those that we are contracting can actually deliver the services that they are promising. And I think I like the idea about what you're saying about reset. And I think that's what my nonprofit legislation is going to do, is really reset how we evaluate people who are in those contractual obligations with us.
And I wonder, I mean, you said something, like, hey, it can be less expensive for us to source these services to nonprofits who maybe specialize in that. What I wonder though is, you're supportive of unions, I'm supportive of unions. Are we taking money away from city workers, unionized workers? If we could bring more of this and it's a core service, like, should we be bringing some of that back inside the city and not outsourcing some more, because we could support people who are workers in our city at the same time? Right.
Well, no, I am not for, let's just get one thing straight. I'm not for outsourcing union jobs. That is not, we have Prop J. There are many methods in place to make sure that we're not doing that. We depend on nonprofit services to help us deliver. There's only so many city jobs we can have within various departments, and they're delivering on services as well. So it's a combination that needs to work together. Also, some of these nonprofit workers are unionized, and if they're not unionized, I know they're trying to unionize in some of the nonprofits like the Felton Institute and things like that. So, I think we need to find a way to be harmonious in the services we have to provide. We have to understand better, like, what do we really need in the city? In terms of the fentanyl crisis, do we have enough recovery beds? Do we have enough methods and means to get them into the recovery beds? We do not do a very good job, or the departments don't do a very good job in informing us, the legislative branch, on what they actually need us to fund to make sure that we are making a difference out there. And it has been a constant drumbeat since I've been on the board for 6 years, asking the Department of Public Health, how many mental health beds do we need? What type of mental health beds? Locked? What do we need to do to get a handle on this problem? Because we depend on you, department head, or, to tell us what it is we need to spend money on so that we can then make a difference. And a lot of times we get, well, this and that, and you'll see the frustration, not just from me, but my colleagues, when we have our treatment on demand hearings and we have hearings on mental health SF. it is so frustrating for us at times to really try to get the information we need to figure out how do we invest it to make a difference.
San Francisco, more than 35,000 employees. I don't know the recent, number, 38, 39,000. If we were a company and of that size, what surprises me is there's a couple of things we probably wouldn't do. I mean, one, the idea that we would sort of like have a third party or outsource over 1/3 of our budget. When we're that big a company together, it's like, no, we probably wouldn't do that, number one. And two, if we were a company, there would be this idea of like ROI, return on investment. And so I wonder, do we need this idea of citizen or resident ROI? Meaning, if we're going to invest this dollar in this, we better see that we get value of that. And we better do that on a line item by line item basis and make sure we're getting value. And I feel like people are so disillusioned now that they wonder, like, who is checking this? Who is supposed to be checking that we're getting ROI? Is it Supervisor Stefani on the Board of Supervisors? Is it the comptroller's office? Is it the city administrator? Is it no one? So who actually checks this stuff to make sure we're getting our money's worth?
Yeah, I think that goes back to my nonprofit legislation with the comptroller's office. And we did talk a lot about ROI. We talked about a lot in terms of, the money we spend out, what are we getting in return? And are we really then making a difference in the issues that are causing so many problems for everyday San Franciscans, So, and if we're paying someone to solve a problem, if we're paying someone to really get in there and help people with their substance use disorder, and they continue to provide, well, right now we don't even really know. We don't have a great way of even looking at whether or not they're doing it. And that's what my legislation is going to do, is to really focus on the performance of the nonprofits. We have not done that. In 20 years ago, a report came out that Sophie Maxwell,
I think it was like 2003, right? This report that we need to put, it's almost like she could see into the future, right? Because it's like, says, if we don't deal with this nonprofit the way we hold them accountable, we are going to have major issues in delivering our social services and our social net, which is, lo and behold, 2024, she was right.
She said almost exactly that.
Yeah.
She really did. She said, if we do not tackle this problem, we are going to have a crisis in our delivery network. We are, and she was right. She saw the future. It was right before her. And I don't know why nobody fixed it until now. And I'm really glad that we did, but I really think it's going to make a huge difference. The controller, our past controller, Ben Rosenfield, agreed. I think we're going to, once this starts getting in place, I think we're going to have a lot of different conversations, and the nonprofits that are continuing to take advantage of the situation, I think those stories are going to go by the wayside, because they're going to realize there's not going to be a lot of room to do that anymore.
Like the gravy train is over. You don't feed yourself at the expense of San Franciscans. I have one more serious question for you. Okay. And then I want to just do fun questions and get to know you to wrap up.
Okay.
And the last serious question for you is that when I think about corruption, really, you mentioned Mohammed Nuru. It's probably the most egregious case of someone who's the head of public works accepting essentially millions of dollars in bribes. I think about, hey, if we said there's a company that was bribing Mohammed Nuru with millions of dollars, and we said, we're going to keep them around. And then we said there's a company that, after bribing, essentially overbilled San Franciscans for $90 million more. I think you know who I'm talking about in a second.
Yes.
And then he said, and they're still going to be around. And in fact, they have a monopoly on trash and sanitation services in our city, and we're just going to keep that there. People would say, you're crazy. Why would you do that? And of course, I'm talking about Recology. Why does no one talk about that anymore? Because I think it's like one of the most egregious examples of corruption, and they're just kind of like, almost, it feels like got a slap on the wrist.
Well, it did go through a court process where they had a settlement, and they're under the guise of that settlement in terms of what they can and cannot do and how much they had to reimburse the city. And when there's only one person to do the job, I guess hopefully through this last lawsuit and what they've learned, they're going to do it better. We just actually had a contract that was going to be covered by Allied Waste, and I believe that they've now pulled out. So we're in a situation where that it leaves us with having to put that contract out on the market again. So we'll see. I mean, I don't know how you solve for, you're talking about Recology. It did go through a process where they had to pay huge fines, and hopefully they learn to do better. But until there's another competitive, contractor out there, that's the company that
we do.
We're doing business with.
It's the reason why maybe we don't want monopolies and we want more competition. But
I'm always for more competition.
Okay, well, sounds good. Well, to wrap up, lightning round, just to get to know you a little bit better. You're a mom, as
Yes.
you've mentioned. Just so for people to know, like, what kind of mom are you? Are you a fun mom? Are you a tough mom? Are you I think my wife's over there as a mom also is watching as well. What is your kind of like your mom style, just to get to know you better?
I think I'm a really fun mom, and I'm always I'm a very honest mom. My kids and I have an incredible relationship. They can tell me anything.
Do they comment on your campaign? Do they tell you, Mom, I didn't like that, I did, or do you not talk politics?
Oh, you should meet my 14-year-old daughter. Yeah, she has an opinion about everything, but she keeps me in line. And my 19-year-old son, he voted for the first time, and he voted for Mom, and that was very nice. But I think the thing that I'm most proud of so far in this world are the kids that I've raised. I'm a very good mom, and I love my kids beyond comprehension. And I'm so blessed to have, them in my life. They mean the world to me.
Second question is, campaigns are hard. You're out there, you're meeting a lot of people. When you just need to like get away, clear your mind, do something else, remember that there's more to life than San Francisco politics. What do you do? What is your go-to? I
exercise. I run, swim, work out with my trainer. For me, exercise has always been where I go.
Is this daily exercise? Is this once a week? Or how do you fit that all in?
Well, I try daily, but that doesn't always work. I have a Peloton, and but I make sure, for me, I don't do the triathlons that I once did, but my last triathlon was actually a year ago this month in Hawaii. So, exercise to me is what keeps me sane.
Okay, well, there you go. And I know my wife's ears perked up. She's an open water swimmer.
Oh.
Swims from like Alcatraz to San Francisco. So there you go. Okay, and then also, where do you go? Like, you can't spend more than $20. A treat in the city, a restaurant, your kind of go-to, you got to pick up something fast. You got $20 to spend. Any recommendations of like go-to places in San Francisco?
For what type?
For like a lunch, a snack, a dinner, a treat, anything else?
Well, on Union Street, I love Italian homemade. I mean, I'm Italian, and it has incredible pasta. You can get a pasta there for less than $20.
It's one of those ones that's like more casual style. You get at a fancy restaurant, but more casual. You order at the counter.
Yeah, yes. Definitely. And Joe Gelati on, if you like gelato. I'm going all full on Italian here, but yeah, my daughter and I swing by there a lot. We get gelato there a lot. So that's less than $20, but yeah.
Okay. And then final question, is what do you recommend? You have out of town visitors. They come to San Francisco. It's like not the normal, like go see the Golden Gate Bridge kind of thing, but like hidden gems in San Francisco. Any recommendations you make or to our viewers and listeners about something you got to experience in San Francisco that's like maybe off the beaten trail?
Off the beaten trail. Well, I'm lucky that I live right next to the Presidio, and I love being in the Presidio. The tunnel tops are, I don't know if you've been out there, but they're absolutely amazing.
Great kids playground. I have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. We go
and
there.
Battery Bluffs, which is also open before tunnel tops. I mean, I love the Presidio. There's so many hidden gems, like the Lover's Lane walk. There's so many hikes in the Presidio. So what else? Gosh, there's so many. Japantown I love. I lived in Japan for a year, taught English there right after college. I love going to Japantown.
Hajimemashite, Kaplan desu.
Oh, sumimasen. Watashi no nihongo wa jouzu de wa arimasen.
Okay. Our Japanese viewers will correct us on our horrible pronunciation.
Exactly.
But yes. Well, and have you had a chance to explore Sacramento? If that's going to be maybe starting next year where you hang your hat. Have you had a chance to explore it? And how are you going to do? Are you going to commute back and forth? How are you going to do that?
Well, I got to get there first. Okay. Knock on wood. I'm Italian. I'm very superstitious, but we don't. We have a race to win, and so I love Sacramento. Though I went to law school there. My mom lives in West Sac. 2 of my sisters live in West Sac. So Sacramento is where where I have a lot of family members. So I have a room at my mom's house. Okay. So I have a place to stay. And, I take the train a lot. I love Amtrak. I love the Capitol Corridor. I'll be from Monday through Thursdays for like 6 months out of the year. Whether or not I'm commuting back and forth will depend on what's going on with my daughter. She was actually, when I told her there are actually, months out of the year where I won't be in Sacramento, she was somewhat relieved, but then somewhat bummed.
Okay.
She's like, oh, great.
Okay. She's at that age. Yes.
No, I'm kidding. But, so we'll see, we'll play it by ear and see how it goes. But I'm lucky that I have a place to stay. And then I get to spend this time with my mom, especially because for a long time, my mom, and I'll share this personal thing because it's one of the things that makes me tick the most, is that my mom was in a very abusive relationship for 41 years. And this is why domestic violence for me is something that I care so much about. And so for my mom to be single at 76, living with one of her daughters and someone I get to see much more than I ever did when she was isolated from us is such an incredible gift. And the fact that I might be able to spend more time in Sacramento with my mom is, for me, just something I really look forward to.
What is her opinion of your rise in politics? Is she a proud mom?
Yes. Her nickname for me is MM, which means Mighty Minnie.
Okay.
So,
well, there you go. Thank you, Supervisor Catherine Stefani, candidate for State Assembly for District 19. And is it just your mom? Am I allowed to call you Mighty Minnie?
I don't know. We'll talk to my mom.
We'll talk to your mom. She might have the corner on that nickname. Thank you so much for joining us on We Are San Francisco.
Thanks, man.